Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Let's talk about erotic horror. So, needless to say, today's essay is going to be tricky to discuss. Aside from the TOS guidelines of whatever social media you happen to be watching this on, I would think that it's safe to say that talking about erotica in any form, in mixed company, tends to make people a little uncomfortable. And to that, I say buckle up and get ready because we are going to talk about sexy time in horror movies. Now, as I've said many times before, horror in general is the kind of genre where absolutely anything goes, really. So, like other genres have to follow certain rules, spoken and unspoken, and whatever. And those are things that they generally have to abide by in order to fit into the genre that they are fitting in. For example, comedies can be silly, they can be upper class, and they can even be tasteless. But above all, they have to be funny to somebody. Horror, on the other hand, doesn't have to be inherently scary, even though it is in the name. But it doesn't have to be that in order to be considered horror. Like all of these staples that you think belong in a horror movie actually aren't really necessary. Horror movies do not have to be scary or gory or require deeper thought or great special effects or anything to belong to the horror genre. And conversely, horror is scary and gory and deep and has all the special effects. Filmmakers really can do whatever they freaking want. It's the Wild West of the genres. That said, it's only logical that there would be sexy time in horror movies, if for no other reason than that if the point of horror is to tap into those things that make us feel the most vulnerable in our fears, then, well, of course it makes sense. I'm saying the most vulnerable that you could possibly be is when you're naked with somebody you think you can trust in a place that you happen to think is safe or safe-ish. And of course, horror is a great place to play with that. Now, there are so many sexy horror movies out there, most of which live in the realm of vampire horror for obvious reasons. But if you really want to know about sexy time in horror movies, well, we have to take a trip in the Wayback Machine and look at the history of erotica in horror. Before I get going here, I need to make something really, really clear. We will not be discussing movies that deal specifically with sexual assault, or at least not in the context of that sort of thing being considered sexy, because it's not. There's nothing sexy about sexual assault. Full stop, end of sentence. And really, in my mind, movies that depict sexual assault or that's the main focus of the plot anyway, that's a whole other discussion for another day. Okay, so if we're looking at the very beginnings of horror films starting to get a little freaky, it's kind of always been there, guys. Like from the very beginning, horror has always kind of left the door open for a little, See, artists have been trying to find someone to match their freak for centuries. Literally centuries. In just about any form of media. In paintings, writings, just any time that there has ever been artwork, something freaky is somewhere mixed up in there. I mean, all I'm saying is that if we really, really want to dig into the first depiction of anything sexy going on, I'm pretty sure we'd have to turn the hands of time all the way back to the beginning of human history. Like we've always kind of been freaks. But the reason why I say that is because the inspiration had to come from somewhere when movies started to come about. And in the world of horror, filmmakers clearly had some inkling of what might turn audience on, even way back at the beginning. I mean, Bela Lugosi in 1931's version of Dracula was definitely considered swoon-worthy to the female audiences of the day. And you know what? While we're talking about it, if you're looking for someone to blame for all the dirty, dirty sex in horror movies, look no further than vampire movies. I'm saying from Lugosi's Dracula on, vampires in movies have had the singular goal of getting freaky with their victims at every given opportunity. Now, there are a few outliers, of course, in the vampire genre. But for the most part, vampires have been sexy since 1931. And I mean, is it even really hidden that well in a vampire movie? I mean, 1936's Dracula's Daughter, for example, was a whole lesbian film about lesbian vampires doing lesbian stuff during a time period, by the way, when you couldn't even show a toilet flushing on film. And the crazy thing is that Bram Stoker, who basically jumped off the whole vampire craze, did not originally intend for Dracula to be, well, sexy or attractive in any way. Nosferatu was the German ripoff of Dracula. Quite literally, they got sued because they were a German ripoff of Dracula. And in that depiction, the titular vampire is a monster. He's supposed to be a monster. And then somebody somewhere said, nah, we need this monster to be fuckable. And by somebody somewhere, I'm talking about director Todd Browning and cinematographer Carl Freund, who both were responsible for making Bela Lugosi sexy in the first place. But as much as I'd like to hang the freaky hat solely on vampire films, they weren't really the only ones out there turning audiences on. In 1942, RKO Studios brought us Cat People. Cat People and Curse of the Cat People. But the concept, the initial concept is really a trip. So real quick, once upon a time, there was a woman out there, just out there in the streets, living her life. She was a virgin, she never had sex, and discovers along the way that if she does have sex, she'll turn into a panther and kill people. Now, in 1942, we don't actually see the sex, and they don't actually say anything about the sex specifically, but it's heavily implied that if she does happen to do the deed with a man that she really wants to do the deed with, she will turn into a panther and eat him. But the best thing about this entire storyline is that this movie came out post Hays Code. Now, if you don't know what Hays Code is, it was a movie rating system prior to the one that we have now. Basically, it was a super strict code that studios self-imposed upon themselves between the years of 1934 and 1968. During that time period, anything considered amoral or fun in any way was restricted from Hollywood movies. Okay, so here's a quick list of some of the things that you could not show in a movie during this time: sex, graphic violence, homosexuality, promiscuity, substance abuse, and it kind of goes on and on. Like anything remotely fun at all, you could not show in a movie during the Hays Code period. And that says a lot about Cat People in general, because they actually got away with it. I mean, enough to where we all got the point of where this movie was going. Now, you would think that with the Hays Code in place, sexy movies would not have been a thing until after 1968. And you would be wrong. People found lots of ways around the Hays Code to show sexuality in all of its various forms. You just kind of had to read between the lines. Now, after the Hays Code era, sex in movies in general just kind of exploded. I mean, by the 70s, characters getting it in were more commonplace, of course. And in the way of horror, they were getting creative with it. So much so that by the time the 80s rolled around, I don't think anyone even considered that you could make a horror movie without including TNA. And honestly, for that, we can blame the slasher fix. And the funny thing about that is that slasher movies would end up being the antithesis of the Hays Code era and also a cautionary tale. So like everything that the Hays Code restricted, slasher films did. If the Hays Code said no nudity, slasher films did all the nudity, sometimes for no reason at all. The Hays Code said no drugs. Slasher films had characters whose whole personality were that they were drug addicts. And as far as graphic violence was concerned, but see, here's the thing. In a slasher film, all of those things were used as a kind of punishment for the characters that engaged in them. And usually, the only survivors are the ones who were as pure as driven snow. See my whole thing. I did a whole video on Final Girls for an elaboration of that. Nowadays, the tide has kind of changed in horror. Nudity is still around, but it's nowhere near as gratuitous as it used to be, nor as rampant. And personally, I don't think that that's necessarily a good or a bad thing, but rather another point in the cycle that has changed. Now, what I mean by that really is that filmmakers have always been on the one-up game from the beginning, and this actually is no different. And that's because audiences change over time. And these days, what an audience might think is sexy has become more than just full frontal and a pair of nice boobies. So then up in the game in terms of sexy time in horror can mean more suggestive things, or things that are just out there but way kinkier than you might be ready for. It's very much about playing with our whole perception of what we now believe is sexy in general. All of that being said, it's time to talk about 3 of my all-time favorite sexy horror movies. First on the list is 1982's Cat People. Now, this is the remake of the 1940s version. The concept in this movie, well, it's basically the same as the original. You have your main character who is a virgin and discovers along the way that if she has sex, she's going to turn into a panther. But unlike the 1942 version that led with suggestive dialogue, this is the 80s, y'all. They just let it all hang out in this one. Nastasha Kitsky was basically sex on a stick for the entire movie. I mean, she was all pouty lips and long legs and short skirts, and she's got a whole feral cat energy thing, like every moment that she's on screen. And speaking of feral cat energy, Malcolm McDowell, who plays Kinski's brother in the movie, is like everything that they write about in alpha romance novels. He's decidedly evil and particularly horny, and of course, this character wants very much to sleep with his sister. And listen, as a disclaimer, I want to make it known that I absolutely do not approve of incest whatsoever in any form. I will say this much though, if you are my age and you have a bunch of stepsister, stepbrother porn in your search history, this movie might have been a catalyst. You might want to talk to your therapist about that. Next on my list is 1971's Daughters of Darkness. This is a lesbian vampire movie. And honestly, you can include just about any lesbian vampire movie before the 2000s on this list. I'm just saying, like, anytime you feature any even suggestion of women kissing, you kind of headed in the right direction for sexy horror movies. Okay, so Daughters of Darkness is the story of a mysterious vampire named the Countess. Or Countess something. It's been a while since I've seen this movie. So this Countess happens to be in the same hotel as a young couple who are on their honeymoon. Fun fact, the Countess in this movie is based on Countess Bathory, who was a woman in Hungary who liked to kill girls and young women and bathe in their blood. Don't worry, that's not what this movie is about. Okay, so the Countess in this movie sets her sight on the woman in the honeymooning couple and then seduces her with her vampiric femininity, which isn't actually that hard to do because as it happens, the husband has a thing for domestic violence. This movie is gauzy and beautiful as vampire movies tend to be, and it has a kind of dreamlike quality to it. And there's not a whole lot of nudity in it at all. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 scenes where we see a boob and a bare butt, and that's about it. So for this last movie, I have to go with The Hunger. Yes, it is another vampire movie. I mean, what can I say? They did start the whole sexy horror movie thing. If I've had a longer list in this video, at least half of the movies I'd be talking about would be vampire films. Now, The Hunger is like a love letter to all of our bisexuals out there. We've got 2 vampires who have been together for hundreds of years, and one of them decides to bring in a third. This movie is just freaking beautiful, and it's freaking beautiful with freaking beautiful people in it and beautiful music, and it's like, I like to say that this movie is like what being goth felt like in the 90s, even though this movie was in the 80s. And Willem Dafoe has a small part in this movie, and not for nothing, but this is probably the sexiest he's ever been. And if none of that draws you into watching this film, I have 3 words for you. David fucking Bowie. And I want to give an honorable mention to a more recent film, Ty West's X. I was going to include the whole trilogy, but honestly, Pearl doesn't really go in the sexy direction as X and Maxine do. But I wanted to mention this film because this is a movie about porn stars doing porn star stuff, and still manages to shoot completely around the fact that they are shooting a porn. And that's kind of fascinating to me because this is the kind of movie that you could actually throw in all the TNA that you want to, and no one would blink an eye. It's kind of the subject matter of the film, but there's virtually none. None at all. I mean, there is like the suggestion of a giant ding dong, but that's about it. And that's it for this week's video essay. Thank you so much for listening to me rant for a little bit. I post every 2 weeks, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you'll be the first to see my next post. With that said, see you next time. Bye.